Hello and welcome to Giving to the Givers, behind the scenes of 21 charitable organizations and how they're helping to change our world. I'm Christy Corwin with Build a Better World Foundation, and our foundation is inspired by the extraordinary lives of my grandparents, Gina and Russ Garcia. My grandfather was a world-renowned composer, arranger, conductor in the music world, and he and my grandmother also dedicated their life with the inspiration of the Baha'i faith to do so much humanitarian work around the world and with music. And basically, the Build a Better World Foundation, what we do is we produce concerts and events that support the empowerment of our youth and young people in the arts. And we also like to feature and create awareness and raise funds for already existing organizations that are doing good in the world. And today we're so fortunate to have such a wonderful person and amazing organization called the Tahirih Justice Center. And the founder, Layli Muro, is joining us today. And we're really grateful to have you with us today, Layli. And if you would just share a little bit about the inspiration and the spark behind creating the Tahirih Justice Center and the reason why and the mission and how long you've been in existence, that would be really lovely.
Sure. So the Tahirih Justice Center has been in existence for about 22 years now. It was in 1997 that we started. And the reason Tahirih got started was because when I was a law student, I had the honor of representing a young woman who was from Togo in West Africa. And she was fleeing a tribal practice known as female genital mutilation. She was also fleeing a forced polygamous marriage where she would be the fourth wife of a 45-year-old man when she was 17 years old. I ended up representing her in immigration court, and her case climbed to the highest immigration appellate court in the United States. She was denied at the lower level, and it climbed to what's called the Board of Immigration Appeals. And at that point, her case received a good deal of media attention, and she ended up winning her claim for asylum, her request for asylum. And what her case did is it changed the law in the United States. It set legal precedent, allowing women and girls who are fleeing forms of persecution that are being inflicted because of their gender to receive asylum. So prior to her case, gender-based harm was not seen as a grounds for asylum. And so her case opened that door. The other thing that happened as a result of her case was that there was kind of commercial interest in the story of her escape and as a law student helping her. And so she and I wrote a book together, and I used all of my portion of the proceeds of that book to start the Tahirih Justice Center. When I did that, I was quite young, and I had wise mentors in my life who reminded me that I didn't know what I was doing. And so I stayed out of the day-to-day running of Tahirih for the first few years so that I could learn to be a lawyer. Having one case like that doesn't make you a good lawyer. It makes you lucky, but there's a lot to learn. And so for several years, I worked at the Justice Department and then at a large corporate firm, and then came in-house to the Tahirih Justice Center. And so now, 22 years after the original starting of Tahirih, we now have over 100 staff, full-time paid staff. We are in 5 cities throughout the United States: San Francisco, Houston, Atlanta, Washington, and Baltimore. And we're litigating around 2,000 cases at any given time. We provide free legal defense for immigrant women and girls who are fleeing human rights abuses.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I was so fortunate to be able to come to your fundraising event last weekend in Orange County, California, and it really helped me to understand more deeply about the significant work that you're doing, and so touching to hear from these women who have just, their lives have been completely transformed, and I'm just so in awe of the specialness of what you're doing. So thank you so much for for creating this organization and for all the wonderful work that you're doing. With everything that you're doing to raise awareness and funds, what has been, would you say, the most successful event or project that you've completed or worked on, and why?
So, when you say project, we litigate on behalf of, we provide legal defense on behalf of women and girls. And in the time since our inception, we've helped 27,000 women and girls. I think probably the biggest success is the fact that we have a 99% success rate in the cases that we litigate. And that's defined by having gone all the way through the system. So if somebody is denied protection at a lower level, we will continue to appeal that case, but we are successful at the end with a 99% success rate. And that is after taking the hardest cases that others refuse to take, cases that we're told their adequate law is not there for. And so we take cutting edge and really time and resource intensive cases. But what we do is we provide an army of support for those cases. We partner with almost 3,000 pro bono lawyers. These are lawyers at large corporate law firms, like the one I used to be at. They are at companies where they might be in the in-house legal team for those companies. And these are lawyers who litigate at the highest levels, are not used to losing, who probably got A's at Harvard, and they represent our clients along with our in-house attorneys. And so that mix of support has resulted in a 99% success rate. We also do public policy advocacy. We litigate what's called impact litigation cases, which means we will bring a big case to set a precedent or to change a policy or change a law. So it's a little different than an individual case. And I would say that on that level, aside from the individual cases, but at a larger public policy level, I'm very proud of the work that we did around the so-called mail-order bride industry. The legal term is international marriage broker, but essentially the industry, the American men pay a great deal of money to access a database of women from other countries who don't pay. They are recruited, sometimes from off the streets in their own countries, to be marketed to American and then also European men. They are marketed to men very overtly as being docile, submissive, not speaking English, believing in traditional power relationships and family. And then the agencies in turn attract men who are interested in those power dynamics and dominating relationships. Wow. At Tahirih, we were experiencing a lot of women who had come through these agencies but didn't realize how they were marketed, because on their end of things, their website, there's one website called submissives.net. And American men were on this website learning about how submissive the women were going to be, and they were attracted to that. The website that was the mirror website in their local language in Ukraine was called usmarriagepartners.com. And it marketed men as willing to change diapers, willing to cook dinner, help with laundry, and they played on the stereotypes of American men to attract the women. So there was a huge disconnect in expectations. And then they dated, they got to know each other, but it was based on a foundation of fraud, essentially. But then when they married and came to the United States, they learned the truth. They experienced abuse or whatever the circumstance was. And this was a huge problem. We had one client who was the third so-called mail-order bride of a man who was using the agencies on a kind of serial basis to find his next victim. We ended up bringing a lawsuit against this agency. And it was a 2-week, highly media-covered federal jury trial. And the agency, the company, was found liable for the abuse that was inflicted by a private actor, by this guy who married the woman, but the company was held liable. And we wanted that because we wanted to change the way the industry worked. Also, as a result of that case, we were able then to inspire legislation, which we drafted, that would regulate the industry. It requires now, President Bush signed this legislation during his term, now women have access to their criminal histories, so they can have full information about who they're marrying.
Oh,
Now it's not possible to apply for multiple fiancés at once. It used to be that these guys would like apply for 3 different fiancés, and whoever got in was the first one. They were clearly not interested in a deep, authentic marriage. And then there were a few other protective provisions that you can't petition for a fiancé who is less than 18 years old. Before that wasn't the case. So there were a few legal changes we were able to make as a result of that work.
wow. And you know, what really astonished me that I discovered at your fundraising event was how many of these arranged marriage type things are even going on right here in the United States. That's what really shocked me, because I wouldn't think that it was going on right here in our own United States.
So I think you're talking about forced marriage,
Yes.
which is a slightly different thing, but absolutely is a huge issue. And so on that, the Tahirih Justice Center has been working on a state-by-state basis. So this is an area of state law. It has to do with marriage law.
Okay.
And before Tahirih began working on this issue, there was not one state in the United States that had an absolute bar to child marriage. And the reason for that is that the laws around child marriage were developed largely around the turn of the century, and they were contemplating Romeo and Juliet scenarios. And so any recommendation on age for marriage was waivable by the consent of parents. So that if your parents are the ones forcing you to marry, then it makes you vulnerable to forced marriage, because there's nothing in the law that required your consent as a child. So we received a phone call, for example, from a clerk in a courthouse who said that they had a child standing on the other side of the window at the clerk's office along with their parents, crying, asking the clerk not to give the marriage certificate to the parents because she didn't want to be married. And the clerk realized there was nothing in the law, there was nothing in the form that required her consent. It only required the parents' consent.
Right.
So we had this problem in the way the law was drafted. And so Tahirih has done a lot of work on a few areas, or a few levels. One was to conduct research. We partnered with the Urban Institute, which is a social science research think tank. And through our partnership, we were able to get data from states that showed the high volume of child and forced marriage. Thousands and thousands were taking place. And what's interesting is our work came to it through the immigrant community, but what we found was that demographically, the vast majority of child marriages happening in the United States were from white, Caucasian, American, conservative Christian communities. That was actually the dominant demographic. Also, some ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities.
Wow.
And so then we began drafting legislation, and now I'm happy to report that 22 states now have legislation that has degrees of protection around child marriage. We also have a national phone number that people call from all over the country in order to get assistance, because there weren't service providers who knew this issue, who were working on this issue. And so Tahirih has become a national service provider, technical assistance provider for local advocates on how to help victims of child and forced marriage.
Okay, wow, that's wonderful. Would you like to share that phone number?
I'd have to look it up.
Okay. That would be.
It's on our website.
It's on your website.
Access.
Okay.
Yeah, our website is www.tahirih.org, TAHIRIH.org.
Perfect. Thank you for, wow, that wonderful work that you're doing regarding that as well, because these new laws are they're so important for young girls and women that it's remarkable. So it's wonderful to see such an evolution in what you're helping to create in recreating laws and things. It's just extraordinary. What has been some of the biggest challenges or struggles that you've had, and why?
I think there are internal struggles and external struggles. our internal struggles have to do with growth, management. A nonprofit organization has to run with the efficiency and quality of a for-profit organization. And it's very important that things be adequately managed, adequately documented, that there are quality control procedures in place, that kind of thing. And so as we've grown, we've had to be very diligent in managing that. And on the whole, Tahirih has been successful. We received the Washington Post Award for Management Excellence, and a few other things, but it requires a lot of work and diligence. In fact, I often say to people, there's this really unfortunate and ill-informed value placed on low overhead of nonprofit organizations. And it's also hypocritical because there is not one for-profit company that would ever be questioned or criticized for having quality control in place, R&D, or marketing, but for some reason, nobody wants nonprofits to do that. But
it's this stereotypical thing. I understand what you're saying, but I feel like things are starting to shift that a little bit.
I think that's true, particularly in sophisticated philanthropy. I think a lot of individual donors still they'll ask, what is your overhead rate, a lot, and really place a premium on that. I remember talking to one person recently who said, I choose this nonprofit because 97 cents on every dollar goes directly to program, only 3% go to overhead. And my answer was, I wouldn't give that organization your money then, because that either means they're lying, first of all, or it means that they don't have accounting systems in place. They don't have databases. They don't have managers. They don't have an HR system. And all of that would scare me. I think a well-run company and nonprofit has to have those things. So our internal challenge is making sure that we have all of those high quality measures in place. Sorry. Our external challenge has to do with the environment that we're in. Right. And the environment relates both to politics and policies. It also relates to the experiences of our clients, and it relates to funding trends. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
And so those are all the challenges that we face.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. So nonprofits rely heavily on funds or corporate sponsors, grants, things of that nature. And what would you say the deepest source of support is that you rely on?
So if you look at our pie chart of revenue, it's exactly evenly divided into 4. So we get 1/4 of our revenue from foundations, 1/4 from government agencies, 1/4 from individuals, and 1/4 from corporations. So that's the revenue mix. Beautiful. And the corporate gifts typically come from special events. The individuals may come through special events, but also come through other kinds of giving. Mm-hmm. Foundations, maybe self-explanatory, and then government grants are a different process.
Okay, wonderful. So we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I would love it if you could share just anything that you'd like to share about the work that you're doing, about any stories, about, and also one of the motives of the Build a Better World Foundation is to uniting many of these charities or nonprofit organizations together in helping to build a better world. And what are some of the ways in which you see it for the future where we might be able to join together with like-minded organizations towards this process of building a better world? So anything that you'd like to share for the next, we have about 5 or 6 more minutes.
So to address maybe the partnership question first, and then there are some other thoughts I could share about the work more broadly, but
sure.
The Tahirih Justice Center works a lot in coalition with other organizations. And so whether, for example, it's on an issue like forced and child marriage, there are 74 organizations that we work with. And Tahirih plays a convening role. We play a role in helping in consultation, helping people consult together who may not normally work together, who come from really different communities, and that's an important value. Similarly, there's an advocacy process every year with the Violence Against Women Act. The Tahirih Justice Center co-chairs the subcommittee on immigration, and then there is a coalition of 80 organizations under that. So working in coalition, consulting, partnering with other organizations, and in particular lifting up smaller organizations with less resources, people who are maybe traditionally marginalized. So even, for example, actually, I think today, in fact, we're hosting a convening in Washington where we've invited immigrant rights organizations that are often not at the table in Washington during immigration reform conversations. So we're very deliberate about reaching out and being inclusive. So there's a lot of partnering, a lot of coalition, a lot of consulting. People are very eager to collaborate, and it's not usually a problem so long as there are opportunities and structures in order to do that.
That's wonderful. Wonderful to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, every day we're talking to each other and every day there are partnerships, and
that's magnificent.
We have grants together, we have, projects together, that kind of thing.
That's great.
One concrete example of that is that there's a wonderful organization called Otro Lado who is working at the border. They are located in Tijuana. And when a lot of the border crisis began to happen, right. They were absolutely overwhelmed. They're a very small organization. We traveled to the border and we provided emergency support for them. This is completely unfunded, but it was the right thing to do, and we did it in any case. So we went down and we supported them. And then because we're a large organization, we have an organization-wide attorney meeting where attorneys can get help from each other. So it's a meeting where attorneys can say to each other, here's a quandary in my case. How do you handle that? I have a legal strategy question. What does this case law mean? And they're able to really support each other. We integrated Otro Lado into our legal team meetings so that they could benefit from that dialogue and the support, the technical management and support of cases. We also flew down staff to help them with their communications, with their fundraising, because there were people willing to fund them. They just didn't have any grant writers on staff. And so we did a whole lot to support them because they were on the front lines. It wasn't about organizations taking over from them. They were well-positioned, well-informed, and local, but they needed help and they needed partnership. And so we worked really closely. We continue to work really closely with them. We have about 7 staff with them right now who are at the border.
Wow.
And so anyway, so lots of partnerships happening. In terms of other things going on at Tahirih, I think at a philosophical level, there are many who would identify what's happening now in the world, and particularly in the United States, as catastrophic and, obviously extremely troubling. But I do see a silver lining in the catastrophe. I see that people, whether it's the Me Too movement or refugees at our southern border, overt racism, whatever we're seeing, it's helping us be clear that we have a problem. It's helping us be clear that current structures, current behaviors, current values are inadequate. And while in years past, we always knew there were issues, we always knew there were problems, but everything was tolerable because it wasn't catastrophic, it's different now. It's different. And this is good because the underlying structures, some of the underlying laws, definitely the underlying values and beliefs were always problematic. And it's not that they didn't exist. It's that we didn't see it so clearly. It wasn't so stark. It wasn't so dramatic, but now it is. And so now there are real opportunities for real change. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited for us to look under the hood, to really change things. I won't bore you with some of the legal ideas that we have around ways to change legal structure at a foundation, because people weren't willing to have those conversations before when we had like this holy idea around our legal system, for example, which was designed from its inception to be racist and sexist. It was completely designed that way. It was overtly intended to be accessed only by wealthy people, overtly. And over the years, we've grafted on different solutions, we've modified it, improved it, changed it a little bit, but the foundation is still working the way it was intended to work. And so there's some really foundational flaws that have to be addressed. And I'm just excited by it being bad enough for us to have to go and look at some of these foundational structural problems that have been there all along. So I see opportunity in even what appears to be.
And I feel the same way you do, that there's always so many different opportunities for solutions to problems, and that thank goodness we're living in a day where we're able to implement these solutions, and the theory of crisis and victory, and crisis and victory, and that there's always a way to solve these things. And I very much think the same way you do, and feel that it's a wonderful day that we're living in to make a difference. And thank you so much for all the difference that you're making. And you're going to be providing a free gift, so everybody's going to want to be sure to click on the URL link below to definitely take advantage of this free gift. Did you want to share just a little bit about the free gift that you're offering?
Sure. It's a report that we did, and it's a result of a survey and lots of consultation at the grassroots around the needs of immigrant women, and it summarizes the most important needs of immigrant women in the United States today.
Yes, so definitely very, very interesting. You're definitely going to want to click and receive that free gift. And Layli, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing these wonderful insights and ray of hope for young women and girls in our legal system. And thank you so much again for all the wonderful work that you're doing. And we look forward to the partnership and supporting one another, continuing on in the future. You know, we just produced the play about the life of Tahirih that Gina and Russ, my grandparents, wrote, and got rave reviews, and it's very significant, and we're hoping to keep up this partnership in light of Tahirih. So thank you so much, and
thank you.
much love to you, and thank you so much for being with us today.
You too. Thank you for all of your efforts.
Thank you.